All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark. I'm going to apologize up front. I'm a bit stuffy. My voice is a bit raspy. I'm still getting over a sickness, but wanted to get you guys this review of Skeleton Crew Episode 3. Episodes 1 and 2 were fine. They weren't great, but they weren't bad. I thought they did a good job of establishing some mysteries for us to theorize about. The child cast was a lot better than I expected. They were charming in some cases, funny in other cases, but they were still a bit rough around the edges, and I think their chemistry needs to continue to build throughout this series. There were a couple plot conveniences, and the immersion was broken for me a couple times because they really lean into that Earth-like feel and the nostalgia of the 80s, and it took me out of it a bit. It felt a little bit too close to a futuristic Earth than it does a galaxy far, far away. But overall, I enjoyed them, and I was looking forward to this week's episode. And I'm happy to report that episode 3 is great. Jude Law absolutely delivers. I have to get that out of the way right up front. He is charming. His comedic timing is on point. He's a scoundrel through and through. But you see the vulnerabilities peeking through when he interacts with these children. I think there's a lot more to learn about him, and I am excited to learn about him because he takes over the show the minute he steps on screen, but he doesn't overshadow the kids. I think the dynamic that they set up is good, and going forward, I am excited to see more of it. The episode has no fat on it. I was skeptical in the beginning when the kids were like, we have to go back to get KM, our droid. I thought the entire episode was going to be this drawn-out plot point that we've seen in other Star Wars shows like Mandalorian, where a seemingly minor, small little plot point is stretched out over an entire 30-minute episode, and it feels like a slog and a waste of time. Luckily, the show breezes through this plot point, and we get to learn a lot about Jude Law's character in the process, so it doesn't feel like filler. Compared to the first two episodes, all of the comedic beats hit for me in this episode. I chuckled a couple times. I think the dynamic between Jude Law and the kids offers a lot of great opportunities for comedy, and they have some really good comedic camera work in here, where the joke is the camera flashing back and forth between the kids and Jude Law's character, or the camera holding on a character for a long time. The direction overall felt really good, not just from a comedic standpoint, but also the opening shot of this episode is this great visual of Wim's dad pondering what happened, and just from the camera and the performance of the actor, you can tell that he is very skeptical that what they're being told about their kids being lost or their kids being found is not the whole truth. And the camera does a lot of the work there. We also get some awesome visuals from the ship chases that happen a couple times in this episode. And finally, we get a bunch of new information around Ad Aden and even more mysteries to uncover. We hear about the jewel planets of the Old Republic and that all of them have been destroyed except Ad Aden. I've never heard of jewel planets. I don't know if it's some really deep EU lore that I don't know about, but I hope this is an original idea and that they can carve out this piece of Star Wars lore and canon that no one's heard about before. So I'm really excited to see how they pay off this huge hint in this episode. I really don't have any complaints or criticisms for this episode outside maybe the motivation as to why Jude Law is helping these kids in the beginning when he can clearly overpower them. They don't have their droid. He can just take off. But I think as we'll come to learn, and maybe this relates to one of the lines he says towards the end of the episode, that he's just like them. He's a lost kid at heart. But I really think we're going to learn more about him, and this will all make sense in the end. This episode was just refreshing for me. I am excited for next week's episode. I was really happy when the credits rolled here. I didn't feel shortchanged in any way, something that Disney live-action Star Wars shows have been making me feel like recently. And I wish I wasn't sick so you could really hear the excitement and the joy in my voice, but I feel like I'm just coming across extremely monotone right now. So I promise I'm over the moon for this episode. Jumping into the episode itself, we pick up right where we left off last week with Jude Law introducing himself to the kids, and he immediately takes over the screen from the first scene, and the banter between the kids all feels natural. Jod as a character is immediately interesting because we know there's a past there. He's very similar to Han Solo. He's out for himself, he's selfish, but you can tell there's a warmth to him by the way he interacts with the kids. He's not an entirely bad person. He just got on the wrong path in life. But as I say that, there is also this dubious, conniving nature to him that I'm hoping they lean into, and I hope they don't turn him to a heart of gold too soon in the show. I want him to really live in this gray area of, should we trust him, should we not? What bad things has he done in his life? And when the moment comes, will he make the right decision? I think ultimately he will, but I hope that's way towards the end of the show. I don't want this to be a quick turn, and by episode 4, we're already in love with him and he loves the kids and it's all happy-go-lucky for the rest of the show. As I mentioned a little in the intro, they all get on the ship and they say, you have to go back for KM. So Jude Law goes back and he's getting the droid, and one of his old crewmates comes up to him and they're having their pirate jargon going back and forth. Oh, I'm shoving off. I'm not staying around here. I'm not part of your pirate crew anymore. And again, I have to give a shout out to the aliens that this show has brought to the table. They have brought to life a lot of aliens that are typically held in the background and don't have speaking roles. So it was really cool here. We saw this beak type alien. I forget what they're called, but that looked good. Later in the episode, we get introduced to this owl alien who very much reminds me of the Avatar: The Last Airbender episode where they go to the library in the middle of the desert and there's the big owl that knows everything. Very much feels like an inspiration for this. I'd be curious if that's what they drew from, or if they're just like owls, books, wisdom, that kind of stuff, which is probably the explanation. But I like to think of it as Avatar. But anyway, we learn Jude Law's name is Crimson Jack. That's how he's known on the high seas, and it's very similar to Jack Sparrow. I think, again, there is a very concerted effort to draw from a lot of pirate iconography and verbiage in this show, and that's totally fine in the Star Wars galaxy. We have Hondo Ohnaka. We know that pirates exist, and they talk like Jack Sparrow. Like, I get it. At the same time, I feel like the show sometimes still leans a little too close to Earth-like pirates, where when they get back on the ship and Jude Law's going through the storage and he finds this trench coat and he gets a saber that looks like a pirate saber and he puts it in his waistband, it feels a bit too on the nose for me sometimes. I think in this context, it's a bit of a nitpick and I'm not really that bothered by it. At least not as bothered as I was by the suburban lifestyle and the stuff we saw last week, but I do think it's something to mention. As I'm recording this, I am thinking about the influences Star Wars has had in its lifespan. Obviously samurais, obviously westerns, but to be honest, now that I think about it, the pirate lore and iconography has really not seeped this deeply into Star Wars before. Not that there's like pirate movies other than Pirates of the Caribbean, but it feels like at this point it is drawing from Pirates of the Caribbean. So does that say that Pirates of the Caribbean is now in the influential stage of its lifespan, where 25 years later, Pirates of the Caribbean is now a classic that things replicate? I think that makes sense, but it is cool to maybe see that evolution of, Star Wars started out being inspired by samurai movies and old westerns, but now it's being influenced by modern pirate movies, which, again, this is just one show in all of Star Wars. I'm not saying all of Star Wars is now pirate-themed, but I think you know what I'm saying. I think the new influences on its shoulder is pretty cool, but I don't want them to get too close to Earth. I still want them to cool it with the Earth-like references and the spyglasses and the sabers that would be on Blackbeard's belt, maybe not a spacefaring pirate's belt. Anyway, back to the Jude Law kid dynamic. We see him make dinner and all the kids realize they hadn't eaten in a long time, so he's eating the food. We have the long shot on him scraping up the bowl and they're all like drooling, and he's like, oh, I made the whole stew pot, help yourself. And they all run over and they're eating it. Of course, Wim is head over heels for Jod because he thinks he's a Jedi. He uses the Force, which I believe he does have the Force. I know KB is very skeptical of him, and for good reason, but I do think he is Force sensitive, and he seems like someone who has used the Force to get by in life, not someone who has lived in harmony with the Force. But I think that lack of connection ultimately keeps him safe from being tempted by the dark side, where he is not that attuned to the Force, and he doesn't pay attention to it that much outside of a parlor trick or a way to get out of a situation. So it's almost a protection, but we don't know enough about him, and it may be true that he does not have the Force, and this has all just been an elaborate trick that he has done in all of these episodes. And when we find out, KB will be the first one to say it. KB has a lot of great moments in this episode. Last week, I really liked the small moment where she saw the little furry creatures in the cages at the pirate dockyard, and she goes up to them and she's very gentle and interested in them. And just that simple scene made me connect with her. And now this week, I like her even more because all of the kids are skeptical, except Wim, of Jod, and they go to sleep at night, no problem. So how skeptical can they be? But KB, she stays up, and Jod thinks everyone's asleep. He looks over, and she's staring right at him, and she's like, I do not trust you. And we get this dueling philosophy throughout the rest of this episode with trusting your gut or trusting your head. And I think both are valid. I don't think Jod's point here is invalid when he's like, you can't calculate the odds of everything. Sometimes you just have to go with your gut. But later in the episode, the owl, when KB goes up to her to make sure she's all right, she says, you can't always listen to your gut. Sometimes you have to use your head. You have to think about things. And when your head doesn't make sense of all this stuff that's going on around you and there's alarms going off and something's not adding up, then listen to your head. And she didn't fully trust Jod. And I think she's going to be on his case for the rest of the show. And I like that they're going to have a character that's really there to keep Jod honest. Obviously, Fern will be the enforcer. She's the tough girl in the group. She's going to call him out and get the KM droid to beat him up if needed. But I think they are doing a good job of funneling the kids into their respective roles. It is interesting to see Wim bleed into the ensemble here, where in the first 2 episodes he was the main focus, and in this episode he actually takes a back seat and Jod is really the focal point of the episode. He does have his moment where he gets in the gunner chair, and it's very much reminiscent of A New Hope when Luke gets into the gun chair for the first time, and he sees the galaxy from the gunner seat, and he's firing, and he's having so much fun, even though this is not a game. He could have shot down an X-Wing, and then he would have been wanted for murder, which is actually crazy. I was like, what if these kids actually shot down one of these X-Wings? Like, what would have happened? What I did really like about this episode was the moments when the kids would hash out their ideas and their thoughts on the whole situation together as a group, without the adults and without the droids. They're talking about their credits again. What is our home planet of At Adden? Like, what is going on around us? And when Jod comes in while they're talking about this, they're like, oh, no, they cover the credits with the food bowls, and they're like, oh, we're not doing anything, no problem. So I like that the kids are forming a group and sticking together and thinking out loud, like not having the story told to them being active participants in the story. Anyway, we go to a moon where Jod has a contact who could potentially find out where At Adden is. Jod, we would expect, is trying to figure out where this is so he can get the hidden lost treasure of At Adden. As I mentioned earlier, his contact is this alien owl lady who is an expert in finding planets. She has all these star maps. She has these scrolls with ancient lore of the galaxy. And it was genuinely just a really cool scene where we get to learn about these jewel planets of the Old Republic that I've never heard of before. But I'm very interested to hear how At Adden fits into this old story, how the other planets were destroyed in the Old Republic. You know, the Death Star wasn't complete until the Empire started coming around, so did the Empire learn about these planets and destroy them periodically, or was there some other super weapon in the Old Republic that we haven't heard about in Star Wars canon yet, or have none of these planets been destroyed and they're all out there? And this is really setting up a potential multi-season story where these kids go out on these adventures to find the jewel planets of the Old Republic, and we get to have these really cool stories about planets we've never heard about and learn about all this interesting lore that is not existent in the Star Wars canon. So I would be very down for that. I don't know if that's what they're setting up or what they're laying the groundwork for if they want to continue this show, but regardless, I'm interested to hear about the jewel planets of the Old Republic, because I don't know what the hell they are, and they sound really cool. Another great detail of this scene is the owl is asking all of these questions about At Adden to the kids, and every answer they give, it's like they were stuck in a time capsule. The owl talks about the Empire and the war, and they're like, what war? And it's a very small line, and some people might miss it, but it's pretty much confirming that the kids were not aware of the Empire and an entire galactic war that went on. That's how isolated this planet was kept from the outside world, and all the information from the outside world was kept from them. Anyway, the owl calls the New Republic to come and arrest Crimson Jack because he has this reputation. Jude Law beats up a female owl in the middle of her workshop, which was crazy, shoots at her and everything, throws her into a bookcase. It was wild. And then they run away with the coordinates, or at least what we think are the coordinates. I'm assuming it's going to be like a list of planets that they have to start to narrow down. But they escape, but before they take off, the kids offer an ultimatum to Jude Law. They're like, you're not getting on this ship. You're working for us now. We'll take you to At Adden, or we'll help you get there, but you work for us in the end. and he agrees to it. And we have this great kind of mask slip moment with Jude where he's like, I'm afraid, I'm just like you, I'm alone. And the kids connect with that, but it also means he's a little unstable. So I think it's a really cool detail. I think Jude Law does a great job of making us feel for him in that moment, and it makes us interested to hear more about what happened to this potential Force-sensitive Jedi who never was character. One last thing about the whole moon planet. I thought this planet finding thing was so reminiscent of Attack of the Clones when Obi-Wan is trying to find Kamino. He goes to Yoda and he's training all the younglings and they have the star map and they're like, there's nothing here. It should be right here. And Yoda's like, how embarrassing. So Obi-Wan ends up going to Dax in his diner. And I'd like to think that Dax and the owl here are just cut from the same cloth. Those old characters in the Star Wars galaxy that live in these little nooks and crannies that just know so much about the lore and the history, and no one knows about them, but they know all these things, and when you find them, the galaxy just opens up and all of these cool stories start to pour out. So I like that they, hopefully, at least I think they did, drew from Attack of the Clones and Dax. Or Dex. I think it's Dex, maybe. Yeah, it's probably Dex. That's embarrassing. But anyway, the last thing I want to talk about relates to At Adden and the facade that's going on there. As I talked about in the beginning, Wim's dad is very skeptical about what they're being told by the security droids. And it's interesting that last week I was very convinced that Kerry Condon was aware of the facade and the sham that the planet is. But I think of her more as a blind follower. So she is very much a part of the machine. She is a part of the ruling class, but she isn't really in on everything to know about the planet. So at least she might be just like a great actor in this moment. She's just passing it off like, oh, I don't know anything. Let's trust the droids implicitly. But maybe she's also just fully brainwashed and she's like, no, the droids will find them. We're fine. The kids aren't gone. It's no worries. They'll get them back. I'm thinking we're going to see a lot more of Kerry Condon and Wim's dad working together to figure out what's really going on with their home planet. But yeah, those are all my thoughts, I think. My voice is kind of shot at this point, so I'm going to wrap it up. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I really loved episode 3. I thought Jude Law's introduction was as good as it could have been. The comedic timing, the camera work, the introduction of more mysteries and lore and unknown history of the galaxy that we've never seen before in canon, as well as some really great character moments from both Jude Law and the kids. So I'm very much looking forward to next week. Episode 4, I hope you'll join me. Please leave a review on whatever streaming platform you're listening to this on. I would really appreciate it. Go follow me over on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.